Alright, critic time! Today I'm thinking I'm doing it for a WAPO because yesterday we did it for a map. So which WAPO? Which WAPO? I guess we might as well finish with the magic stock ones because we already did it. For weapons, I think our last one was the med gun, the second last. Don't know if it was the syringe gun, but we already did both, so let's finish things off with the Bonesaw. Hooray for the Bonesaw! Disclaimers as always. I'm not gonna focus too much into the game design. I'm gonna talk a little bit about it when necessary, but this focus more on the visuals here. And also this critique is gonna follow Feldman's method, which is all about 4 steps in order: description, analysis, interpretation, and judgment. On the description, I'll describe what I see. On the analysis, we're gonna look into the elements of art. On the interpretation, I'm gonna interpret the creative vision behind the art. And on the judgment step, we're gonna take a look into the principles of art here for the Bonesaw to reach the conclusion: is this a successful work of art or not? So without further ado, let's begin. Description. What do we see? It's a saw. It's a hand saw, right? There's like the grip here for you to hold, and it's a very big saw. And it's basically, as the name suggests, is a bone saw made out of metal. There's like a screw here on this, both of the sides. It's apparently not brand new. It has some imperfections, let's say, on the surface here. And what else? Yeah, that's mostly it. Has this part in the back, probably for you to use the help of your other hand if you need to. And other than that, probably we're gonna find in the analysis. So let's move on to the analysis. So for the analysis here, I'm gonna be considering 8 elements of art, because usually there's 7, but I follow the line that believes in 8, which are basically the other 7 plus points. That makes points, lines, shapes, forms, space, texture, color, and value. Let's begin with points. So for points here on the Bonesaw, that's what we have. It's basically like these things here. Now the question is, but aren't they more like small circles? Probably small circles. I think they're big enough for us to consider them as circles, which would be a shape. And if we do that, points are anywhere else. Points. Also now I'm considering points even when they look like they're making a texture. If you watched my critique yesterday, you will realize I decided to do that from now on. So what? Yeah, I think that's it for points, which means none. So let's go for lines. For lines, the F2 has the classic aesthetic of often not using lines for edges of the 3D models. You know, there could be one, for example, in this part here, but in this case there's none. Other games can do that. I always mention the aesthetics of Borderlands, Telltale games, Ultimate Spider-Man. All of those are 3D models with some lines. But anyway, if that's not, there's no lines there. Are there any lines anywhere? I think not. Just looking at it. Any lines? Maybe here on the screw. Yeah, sure. Just like this 2 pair of lines. It's a straight one. Not much to say for. Okay, no, we can say the usual. It's like a straight one, regular in thickness throughout. Somewhat, I would say this is like medium thickness straight, not that thin, but not very thick. And what else? and continues throughout for as long as the line goes. You know, naturally it stops eventually, but the important part is does not like goes, jumps, go, stop, go. You know, so it's a continuous line. And that's it for lines. And there's 2 of them. And they're on the screws. Okay, that's it for lines. Let's go to shapes now. So first things first, let's talk about the small circles. We have both small black circles, which seems to be again some sort of screw or melded part here or something that connects the blade with this other part. What else? Be careful, this stuff here are not shapes. We're gonna talk about them on the element of space. But the grip itself is a shape, and it has its very unique shape, hard to describe with just with some other word by itself. It has a lot of curvature to it, and like a protrusion up here. It itself is kind of protruding for another part. It's very unique in its shapes. What else? Yeah. And also here, like, we have somewhat of a rectangle, over here a half rectangle, half oblong on this part, a circle on the screw, and the blade, perhaps the part with the most interesting shapes. We have the serrated parts for the blade, and at the end of it, a curvature. So it's again somewhat of a half rectangle, half oblong, but with a serrated side to it. Very interesting. And also through different angles we're gonna see different shapes, although the grip, the handle still has all those unique ones. This blade only gets like shorter. What else? Much like the other stuff here, but they're still maintaining like rectangular slash oblong shapes and stuff. The only exception would be like through this angle that we see, and then again a rectangle. And I think that's it. And on some angles the circle becomes something oval. That's probably it for shapes. Let's talk about forms. Which shapes, by the way, in case you're curious, in case you're confused, shapes are about 2-dimensional stuff, forms are about 3-dimensional stuff, so if you are a bit weird, feeling... If things sounded weird for you right now, forms might make a bit more sense. For forms, for example, the handle here has this like projection kind of thing, projected forms to it. It has like the shape and then it's projected, as they say in mathematics maybe. Other than that, also there's like 2 flat sides to it, with a lot of flatness, and this part here again, a lot of curvature, like on this part. What else? The blade is flat, as blades usually are, again with the serrated edge on it though. What else? We had the rectangles on this part before, and now we got a very thin blocky form, sorry. The screw has what appears to be... I can't zoom in, but I guess it's actually not that circular, it's kind of hexagonal, but it's hard to see, which would go for shapes also. But through forms is a bit easier to see the hexagonal forms there. Either way, it also has a flat surface. What else for forms? What else for forms? What else for forms? Mostly it. This inside part here also has some degree of curvature. I think that's it for forms. And also some flatness here at the top, I guess. If we move on to the element of space, now we can talk about these holes and how they look like they are shaped. When talking about space, I often talking about how generous or tight they are. In here, it's like a moderate use of space, I would say, not that tight, but you know, not that abundant in space. These 2 holes in here. Other than that, there is again somewhat moderate use between the grip and the blade, and other than that, some like tight, minute spaces, like here. There's this very small space between that's this part's so flat that I don't even know if that I should consider it a tight space. Let's see. Yeah, like there is some minuscule tight spaces maybe, but mostly like moderate uses in here. And other than that, it's something expensive considering how it's contained in the frame of the presentation here. I think that's it for space in general. Even at most, perhaps we can say pretty open on this part here. Whatever. So that's it for space. Let's talk about texture. Texture ought to be interesting. For example, let's talk about this part of the blade that I mentioned before in the description, that it's kind of like there's some slight imperfections. It's not like it's bent or anything. It's more like it's what's the word here? It's not rusty. It's just it was used, you know. It's a bit smeared perhaps. Or yeah, just slightly smeared on a number of parts, so there's some texture work when it comes to that. Other than that, that's I think the most notable texture. The rest is like textureless. There's just color there, nothing to convey the appearance of a surface or anything. So yeah, I think that's it. Maybe the line there, we could say this is a very minuscule concave texture, you know, there's like a very small concavity here. Maybe we could look at it as a texture also. No, it's just a small one, but I don't know. If we move on, there is the element of color now that I just mentioned. So most notably gray, right? Gray. There's like a darker shade of gray in here, and a lighter one on the screws, and a lighter gray. So like, is this a dark gray or a black actually on the grip on the handle? Not sure if this is a dark gray or a black. I'm gonna say dark gray. So like, basically there's only shades of gray here. Dark gray for the grip, a lighter one on this junction part, and then the lightest on the screw and the blade. Screws and blade. If that's it for color, we can go to the element of value, about light and darkness, brightness and shadiness. So this being 3D, depending on the angle, much like there are different shapes depending on the angle, because this is 3D, there is also different ways that value works depending on the angle here. So for example, on this angle you can see it reflecting light very brightly on the blade, but not here. So the angle matters a lot. In here we see a lot of light reflecting on different parts of the grip, in here less so. But even though there's a lot of variety in angles, through many of them there's some brightness on the grip. Depending on the angle, there is, as I showcased, there an intense brightness on the blade, but that's mostly it. For shadows, is there any? Maybe I think some very small ones on this part of the junction of the Bonesaw, and depending on the angles inside the grip. So yeah. Other than this, the shadows, it's as is customary for 1442, the shadows are kind of mild. You don't see them as being too dark. That's hard to see inside. Even including this part here. And the brightness, there is a respectable amount of brightness as I mentioned. There is angles like this one, which on this angle things get kind of flashy, right? Of how intense the brightness is. But yeah, that's it. Like on some angles, very intense brightness, and other ones that, and that's it. So that was it for the analysis. Let's move on to the interpretation. For the interpretation of the creative vision, let's begin with the easy part. I think it's very reasonable. Maybe weapon nope. You know this. This is the Bonesaw, the weapon of the medic. The medic uses it, so on and so forth. So interpretation, it was designed with that in mind. It was not something else that was they picked it from somewhere else and they just placed it in the game. Okay, what else? Then we have stuff like the name, Bonesaw, the way it works, how it works in game, the medic cuts people with it and stuff like that. So another somewhat easy interpretation that I'll be making here is that this was meant as a reference of Bonesaws that doctors, especially in the past, used to amputate limbs. So, you know, even the name Bonesaw, so it saws bones. If you're gonna amputate a limb, you have to cut to the bone. And also, you know, being the medic, the class, everybody knows that. That's another easy link that we can do conceptually to reach that for that interpretation. So yeah, a reference to Bonesaws that amputate limbs. What else? Would there be anything else for this interpretation? We have the vision here. I'm thinking there is this mirror on the blade that makes me think that it was used before, but I wonder if it's strong enough, so much so that I would add an idea to the interpretation because of it. Something that they wanted to convey there. I don't know. We can also look into the game design to help us in our interpretation, but there's not much to talk about there, right? It's just like a melee weapon, you right click, the medic swings it does damage, it has a higher chance to crit, but that's not something that happens for all melee weapons, not exclusive to the Bonesaw. There is, I guess, the motions the medic used, which does like this and like this, but again, I don't see that helping much. Yeah. Oh! Actually, I will do something. I just thought of a very cool idea here. There is a developer commentary that says that the Bonesaw, sorry, not specifically the Bonesaw, that the melee weapons were designed with musical instruments in mind for all the classes, so I wish to showcase a bit of personality. In the case of the Bonesaw and the other medic saws, there's even the animation of that the medic, when you taunt with it, the medic puts in his shoulders and play it like a violin, right? So easily, that's a cool idea to add. So let's add the idea that this is supposed to have some resemblance to a musical instrument. I'm not even gonna say a violin. Okay, should we say a violin? We could either say, let's just say musical instrument, and I'm gonna be considering that the fact that the medic plays a violin is helping with that idea, but I don't know. Okay, it's like whatever, right? We could either go with just a musical instrument or specifically a violin. With some resemblance to it. I don't know. You know what? I think I'm gonna go with just a musical instrument. I said before that I think more precise, more specific critiques add more to the final conclusion, you know. Because if the art accomplished something more specific, then I think the success is more meaningful. But I don't know. I could go with whatever. The important part is to choose the interpretation that makes more sense. And I don't know. The thing is, if we just say musical instruments, is it going to be a problem if we find out some resemblances to other musical instruments? Not necessarily. I'm just gonna follow what I think is closer to the commentary of the developers in this case. I think that's closer to the vision. I'm just gonna say musical instrument and let the animation for the taunts be helping to reach that conclusion, let's say. So, and I think that's probably good enough for the interpretation here. So to recap, the 3 ideas will be a melee weapon for the medic, 1440 shoe, a reference of bonesaws that physicians used in the past to amputate limbs, and finally something with some resemblance, with some similarity, something of a musical instrument. So those will be the 3 ideas for the creative vision here that we're interpreting. With that said, I'm gonna drink a little bit of water. There we go. And with that said, let's move on to the judgment step. For this critique, for this judgment step, I'm gonna be considering 6 principles of art, which will be movement, unity/variety, contrast, emphasis, balance, and proportion. And let's begin. I usually go with movement first, which by the way is not about animation, it's about how work of art can guide your eyes, move your eyes in some path or direction. That's the principle of movement. So is there anything like that for the Bonesaw? Yeah, easily. On the blade, on the serrated part, so through shapes, forms, and also in repetition of the textures and color. I see that as also helping. All of that is helping kind of move my eyes like to the extent of the blade and then make the curve. On some angles, like upward to downward, from down then upward. And on some other angles, the opposite. What was it? Some other angles, the opposite. But in any case, easily on the blade here. And maybe also on this part here, on this very long junction part of it, attached part of it. Also again with shapes and forms, a bit forms, shapes, form, color. There's not that much textures there, right? Oh, maybe there is. I just realized there's like a very tiny dented texture here, small one. Very slight imperfection on this part. I hadn't noticed before. And also I think the principle, the small circles for shapes, I think they also help a little bit with the movement, because their distance is the distance between these two and this one, the end of this part, are close-ish, somewhat similar. What else for movement? That's the strongest part that I see it. Other than that, there ought to be like smaller examples of it, but let's just move on with what we got for now. So, does any of that help convey this is a melee weapon for the medic? Well, kinda yes, because if you just think on the gameplay, on the game design, whenever you equip this weapon, or whenever you right click, there's an animation of the medic swinging this, and he swings this serrated part of the blade, and when it connects with an enemy, it deals damage. So at least visually it's conveyed that the blade, the serrated part that's damaging someone, the enemy's life go down when you hit them like that. So because of all of that, I think it's pretty intrinsically tied to the game mechanics, and so easily helping you convey that this is the melee weapon that the medic uses, and that it does damage. You can do it, attack people with it on melee easily. And visually it helps you to realize that. What about the idea of a bonesaw used by physicians of the past to amputate limbs? Again, easily, same, also helping because those saws in the past had serrated shapes and stuff like that. You know, saws have that. So easily is following the design of those, and through the principle of movement, that's being easy to notice. So yeah, helping with the visual. And finally, there is the idea of the musical instrument. So we did mention like the movements here on this top part and the serrated part here. that sense, I don't see it helping convey this, anything of a musical instrument that well. You can think possibly on a violin, probably the easiest one because of the taunt of the medic, right? But I don't know if the movement is helping that much with the resemblance. The saw definitely I don't see it. The saw I think very hardly. And very hard for the saw to be doing that. And the other possibility would be like this lengthy part, extended part. But is it doing it? Could you maybe kind of see the strings of a violin in this part here? I mean, if you have a wide enough of an imagination, always, right? But I don't know. I'm gonna say not, because the violin is very, I think, iconic for its symmetry. I think it's an important part of a violin being symmetrical. And so I will say that it's not good enough for helping with that idea. So yeah, not helping. So if that's it for the principle of movement, let's talk about the principle of unity / variety, which is all about different parts of the artwork apparently like working together in one way or another. Many ways to accomplish unity. That's unity. Variety is the opposite, but we consider both at the same time. So many ways to accomplish unity, like proximity, repetition, patterns, continuity, stuff like that. So it's stuff like the continuity of the color of this shade of gray and this like smeared texture on the blade, repetition of the serrated shapes and forms of the blade again, of this, of the saw. You could even mention repetitions on the gray, since everything is like in different shades of gray, that's also unity. For variety, we could mention, for example, which is the opposite. It's easier to think of variety just by the name, for example, there being just this one screw with just this one line in here, the shapes are not that unique, but the line is there and the placement of it's kind of apart from things. If proximity is a way to help convey unity, being apart from things is a way to convey variety, helps. And so this is a point of variety here, for example. Even stuff like the unique shapes of the grip are also sources of variety. So yeah, all of that are stuff. All of that is like unity. It's like unity and variety. Okay, so with that said, does any of that help convey the idea that this is a medic melee weapon? Yeah, again, because if there is unity repetition on the many dents, the serrated parts of the Bonesaw unit there, easily, again, that's tied to the game mechanics. So if you damage people when the animation shows the medic swinging the serrated part, so easily helping convey this is the melee weapon of the medic through this principle now. Same logic also for the idea of Bonesaw that medics use to amputate patients, because again, if we can notice, if the serrated part is being noticed through unity, that's easily helping here. You could also mention stuff like the forms, the flatness of the blade and the colors, gray and textures, this smeared thing that resembles metal. Also value in this case the way it reflects light. All of that also I think easily refers to the material that those saws could be made, metal, to serrate bone. So different ways to help that. And finally, there is the idea of the musical instrument. So if there is gonna be something that, an element that helps, is gonna be this one, unity / variety. So we could say stuff like the continuity of the shapes here of the blade. Kinda, the way it's like. For example, this part is straight, and then it's like there's some amount of symmetry on the curved part at the bottom. There's also variety on the grip of it, as I mentioned, and through that maybe and also there is also, I guess, the also variety helping the screw on the middle part. That may be good enough to convey a bit of the forms to the traits of a violin, you know. If this upper part would be I don't know the proper terminology, the cable of the violin, I don't know. The upper part of the violin, if it's unique, much like the upper part of the violin, and then this would be the body of the violin, and there is even the screw for the middle part where the strings would be. So maybe through Unity there is enough of that to help convey it. Also the size matters a lot, I suppose. If this was the size matters, because if this was a shorter blade, it would possibly be harder to look at, to try to find traits of a violin in it. Also the grip, I don't know how many different designs of Bonesaws are there, but this grip, if the grip was different, no, there are some saws, I don't know if there are some medical saws for amputations that have a grip at the top part, but that, you know, there are that kind of blade for lumberjacks to use, at least in the past there were, that you push back and forth, and not only would that make a bit harder for a melee weapon to use, but in this case we don't see that design, so the placement of the handle and the grip also, I think, helps with this. And yeah, I guess there is enough, at least to me there is enough going on there to kinda see a violin there. Okay. Also the flatness of the blades. The blade is very thin, but unlike violins, but there being this flat part also, I think, has some similarities with the flat front of a violin. So yeah. So the principle of unity / variety is helping convey not only a musical instrument, but at least specifically a violin. I was thinking here, not sure there are other musical instruments I would see easily in here. Like a trumpet, for example, or whatever. I don't know. Well, let's just move on. Let's talk about now the principle of contrast, which is about differences in the artwork, in different parts of the art, how do they relate. So stuff like the difference in color in the shades of grey give us some contrast here, for example. But to me, I think the strongest contrast is between the serrated part here and on the blade and the very curvy shapes of the grip. That's where I see the greatest contrast here. Maybe we could also say a little bit about the element of space, because we have like these gaps, this hole in this part, and here it's like solid. Maybe that's also helping. So to me, that's the greater source of contrast between the handle of the blade and the handle of the Bonesaw and the blade of it. So does any of that help convey this is a magic weapon? Well, I do believe the serrated part is helping with that contrast, as I said, because we have like a lot of these edges on the serrated part. That I see helping contrast with a lot of curvature, the smoothness. It's not perfectly smooth, but there's a lot of smoothness on the grip, on the handle. So yeah, so if there's contrast there, helps you notice the serrated part, and thus again tied to the medic, swinging it and doing damage when the serrated part connects in game. What about the idea of what was it? It's not musical instrument. Bonesaws from physicians. Again, if we're looking at the serrated part, again the design. But in this case, also, I'm not sure if the grip, this design was like common or something iconic for Bonesaws. But yeah, if there are a number of Bonesaws with this design or something similar, that also could help a bit communicate that iconography. And finally, there is the idea of the musical instrument, so contrast. In this case, I don't see it helping with the violin because we're looking specifically at how much curvature there is on this part. Naturally, the serrated part also has nothing to do with a violin, the serrated edge here. Could it look like some other musical instrument? Maybe. Not sure. I don't think so. At least I don't see it anything like that. Especially not with contrast helping. Perhaps. No, I was thinking maybe some sort of chord instrument from the East. They have some with different ways to hold it, but you know, I think nothing that relates that well to this design. So yeah, it should be. So yeah, I don't see it helping. Okay. What about the principle of emphasis? How about there being some sort of focal point that keeps your eyes there in the artwork? So for emphasis on the Bonesaw, emphasis, let me also reset my eyes a bit. Yeah, the blade, the blade, because of the size of it, because of how long it extends, how noticeable it is, how big it is. The serrated part also very easily to notice. So through shapes, forms, especially shapes and forms, I see it helping here. I guess it's not too far off to say that color and texture is also helping, but mostly shapes and forms, I would say. So, and again, yeah, that is helping convey this thematic weapon, because again, if it's the shapes and forms that help bring contrast to the blade of the Bonesaw, the serrated part. Again, when you swing that to do damage, so intrinsically tied to the game design and the game mechanics and the rules of the game. Also, again, if we're focusing on the serrated part, easily we notice and remember the iconography, the typical designs of Bonesaws from physicians who used to amputate people. And finally, there is the idea of a musical instrument, which again, not sure there is any I can think of, which a serrated part would help convey. Really don't know if there's anything like that. Let's just move on. So now there's only two principles of art left to talk about. There is the principle of what is balance, which is all about if you can see some sort of state of equilibrium or tension in the artwork somewhere, or lack of those. And in portraiture art usually is all about everything being in visual equilibrium, although not always, but most of the time. In the Bonesaw, that's basically it. Nothing seems to be falling apart, bending or anything, right? I don't think I see any sort of tension. Like the screws could possibly convey some sort of tension, but the way they did it, they look pretty solid and nothing's loose. So yeah, everything is visually balanced. So does any of that help convey that this is a Bonesaw for the medic, a melee weapon and stuff? No, right? Just being visually balanced, just being stable, I don't think that's good enough. What about the idea of a Bonesaw from physicians of the past that used to amputate people? Well, no again, not really, once again. Because same deal as before, this is just being stable, that's not like the most important part of a Bonesaw. It's okay, it's a part of it, but a lot of stuff needs to be stable for proper function. So, you know, whatever. And finally, what about the musical instrument idea? Again, since everything is balanced, then again, that doesn't help, right? Musical instruments, again, it's like Okay, most of them, if not all, are like stable objects that don't break by themselves, but yeah, nothing here being conveyed visually. Yeah, okay. So the important part, by the way, if there are some point of lack of equilibrium or tension, where that would be, that's the important part. So yeah, but since there's none, let's just move on to the last principle of art here that we're gonna talk about. The principle of proportion, which is all about the different sizes and also like the different parts of the art and their sizes and how do they relate. Also, if there is any part of it with some very unique dimensions that's worth mentioning in comparison to others, that's all about proportion. So for example, if I'm just gonna like try to put things in scale, that's a thing that I do often to try to help a bit and see the art. I would place the saw as the biggest part of the art here. After that, the grip, the handle, and then they have very unique dimensions and shapes and forms, right? So that's why it's kind of it's not always enough to do this. But what else? Other than that, not sure if I would place on the same scale like this attached part here as the grip and the handle. But definitely for the smallest scale I would place like the screws and the screws. And also for something with a very notable dimension here, maybe the blade, just for how long it is. I would say that's pretty noticeable for its dimension, how long that is. A little bit of it goes on this part also. And yeah, so that's I think a good enough of a look into the proportions of things. So, does any of that help convey this is a magic weapon? Maybe in the sense that the blade of it is the biggest part, and again it's the part that the magic swings at people. The only question is, does it matter? We have like a part of it that's not serrated, this part here, which is still contributing to its size, but the magic does not hit people with the smoother part. So does that matter? That's the question we gotta ask. And there's also, I guess, this part here on the back. I don't know. I'm gonna say it's okay. I'm gonna say it's still helping just because most of the blade is serrated, and so bringing attention to the blade by its size and proportion, also the length of it, I think since most of it's serrated, I think that's good enough for helping you realize that this damages people is the magic's melee weapon, game design, when you see this in game, naturally. Interesting to think that if there was not this attachment junction part, maybe that would be harder to see, but yeah. What about the idea of, again, physicians, Bonesaw, again, if the biggest proportion is on the blade, on the serrated blade, again, easily an iconic part of Bonesaws from physicians that you use to amputate people. So I don't know if people should, probably, I would believe amputations might still be done today, but probably not with this kind of saw, I would expect, but I don't know, I haven't done that research yet. So anyway, that's it for this idea of physician's Bonesaw. And finally, what about a musical instrument? So for proportion, this is interesting. Maybe it's helping also, maybe, let's see. Because I do think the size helps somewhat, it's somewhat similar to the body of a violin. No, the neck, the upper part of a violin is the neck, I just remembered. So the question is, what about the rest, or if it's just this, is it good enough? So the neck, there's the idea of the neck of the violin with completely different shapes and forms than this thing here. But do they have a similar Do they have similar proportions? I think the shapes are so different that's kind of screw things a bit, right? But let's see. I guess if we were to consider like from this part of it to here, maybe the proportions would be kind of similar if the angle was different, right? Maybe, or maybe not. I don't know. I don't think the proportions fit too well with a violin for the grip in comparison to the neck of a violin, and again also because the shapes screw so much in trying to think of those things. But but it could be worse. Let's say. I think it could be worse. And finally, what else? And finally, I suppose there is this thing here, which I mentioned for movement. That's kind of if we're gonna perhaps try to see the strings of a violin here, it's kind of misplaced because it's not in the middle. But does that matter for the proportions of it? I don't know. If this was in the middle, I think it would be close to the proportions of the strings of a violin, in how lengthy they are in comparison to the body of a violin. Yeah, okay, so yeah, that's it for me. That's it. Like the body of the violin, it has some similarities in size and proportions to the blade, and this part here has some similarities in proportion to the strings of a violin. But the grip, it's far from a neck. So the question is this good enough? Yeah. Acho que convey a musical instrument. I'm gonna say, reluctantly, I'm gonna say yes. It actually doesn't need to be a violin, you know, in proportions. The problem here is just how much is too much. How close is close enough? You know, basically that's the question. Very subjective, I would say. But to me it is close enough in proportions to the resemblance of a violin specifically. Even though, like, again, reluctantly, because the shapes screw things so much and there is stuff like this is not in the middle of it, but whatever. I will just say it's helping, it's good enough to convey that. And so that was it for the principles and for the judgment step. That means I can pass judgment. And from what I remember, all ideas we considered for the creative vision were accounted for. On many principles we noticed the blade, and the blade helped with reminding us this is a magic weapon, and reminding us of physicians' Bonesaws. And there were like specifically unity and proportion helping convey similarities to a violin, specifically a musical instrument, in this case specifically a violin, much like the taunt of the medic. So my only conclusion is to call this a successful work of art. Congrats, Valve. Thanks for the follow, Dex Samurai. Congrats, Valve. It seems like you conveyed everything. I was kind of in doubt if they would be able to convey this idea of a musical instrument through this melee weapon, much like they said on the dev commentary. But I'm gonna say they pulled it off. So that was it for the critique. Thanks for tuning into that. See you next critique.